Wow. I know this year's Halloween is very different, but today, I know it's going to be a huge request to media mementos, and he's making me do this request to this awesome Egyptian Christian movie called The Prince of Egypt. Because I could be explaining why, despite being a secularly awesome DreamWorks movie, it manages to beat all official competition to be the best film ever of 1998. Although it's one of my favorite Christian movies growing up with, I noticed if the newly released Warner Bros. Mummios is coming out next year, as I felt aware that it will come out in 2023 as a milestone celebration to the 25th anniversary of this movie, as I know it's going to turn 25 next year, so all I can say is that the idea of Egyptian mummies and humans, they trade places to live between Egypt and London, is quite interesting. But I noticed that Tad the Lost Explorer is not the only Christian movie to be based on these mummies that we could always think of. Yeah, as I noticed, there have been 10 movies based on Egyptian mythology, like Brendan Fraser's The Mummy, which was released in 1999 to become a 90s classic like no other. Although it's like a rom-com mixed with horror movie elements, 1956's Ten Commandments, yeah, 1963's Cleopatra, and the original Mummy from 1932, Exodus, Gods and Kings, Land of the Pharaohs, and most notably, Gods of Egypt, and The Scorpion King, which came out 20 years ago in 2002. And the Tom Cruise one that I didn't really like. But, as I noticed, I'm really excited to explain about this movie. So, the plot is going to be a bit simple. As it's got nothing to do with Halloween, by the way. As I noticed that Halloween is a bit too divisive. All we had, like, this movie, I really don't like Hocus Pocus. Because Halloween is all about vampires, Frankenstein, and witches, and not including werewolves and Egyptian mummies and pirates. Well, even science fiction monsters. Or clowns. As I noticed, I had nothing to understand why I haven't seen these two movies. I just don't get it with Hocus Pocus. Why would its sequel Hocus Pocus 2 stole this from my favorite movie, The Prince of Egypt? For some reason, The Prince of Egypt did so well to perfect this falling of being a better movie for me to enjoy. For those who are Christians, but this one fails to be like that. This one pulled it off that what the other one didn't do. As I know, you have to respect my opinion, and I just had no idea what I could think of. But as I noticed, I'm not interested in going to a concert based around Hocus Pocus. So, just save my opinion for this. The plot, which was an animated adaptation to 1956's The Ten Commandments, which was also a remake of the 1923 movie, it was originally pitched to the Walt Disney Company back in 1994, in what Jeffrey Katzenberg had an idea doing this in 1994. Even though what happened when Frank Rose died, DreamWorks employed the artists who conceived this idea of hiring a total crew of 350 people from 34 countries. And it has a blend of combining traditional animation and computer-generated imagery that was created to use software from Toon Boom Animation and Silicon Graphics. Although it is very reminiscent of how The Prince of Egypt would inspire Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse, it was quite an interesting storyline. In the development of this movie, they wanted to focus on a more diverse story or origin story involving around biblical scholars, Christian and Jewish and Muslim theologians, and Arab American leaders to help this film prove that it is related to Black History Month. As I noticed, this movie qualifies as a Black History Month movie. As I noticed that when this movie originally got released on December 16th, 1988, just around the same month that Psych Adventure would come out in Japan on December 23rd, 1988, I have one awesome idea to think of. Although it was originally going to come out in 1999, however, to avoid competition with Ants, this is where they had to do something interesting. Well, it all started in ancient Egypt. The Hebrews, who prayed to God for deliverance, Seti fears that the growing numbers of the slaves could lead to a rebellion, and he orders to commit a genocide on all the newborn babies. However, Yocheved and her two children, Miriam and Aaron, rush to the Nile River, where she places her newborn son in a basket on the water as they bid him farewell with the last lullaby. And Miriam follows the basket as it sails to Pharaoh's place and witnesses the baby brother safely adopted by the wife of Seti, Queen Tuya, who promises to name him Moses. Before leaving, Miriam praises Moses will set everyone free. However, his adopted brother Ramses, who is completely jealous of Moses, was the heir to the throne of Egypt, was called out by Seti for smashing a temple in what he engaged in a chariot race around the palace. But Moses explains that Ramses should be giving his opportunity of what he learned about the responsibility. When Ramses becomes the Prince Regnet, he gets authority over the temples, and Hotep, the high priestess, alongside Huey, have offered him the midnight woman that he loves, Tzipporah. But during the banquet, Moses somehow humiliates Tzipporah by letting her fall into a pond in which she couldn't submit. Appeasing the crown but disappointing Tuya, Ramses, despite his stubbornness of herself, giving Tzipporah to Moses instead and points him to the royal chief architect. That night, Moses and Tzipporah escape from the palace, realize that the now adult Miriam and Aaron don't recognize why he's refusing to believe that they're only slaves. The next day, as he tries to stop a slave driver from flogging an elderly slave, he accidentally pushes the guard to his death, and he's ashamedly horrified that he flees the desert in revenge, despite Ramses' pleas of what he could have stayed. Arriving in the oasis, Moses defends 3 young girls for the brigands, but their older sister was Tzipporah. But Moses, worked by Jethro, Tzipporah's father, and the high priest of Midian, gave him the job of being a shepherd of what Zipporah would tell her. When Zipporah gets married to Moses, he would grow just as life in Midian, but discovers a burning bush through which God tells him to return to Egypt and set the Hebrews free by giving him the staff, the power that he promises to prove that Zipporah would join him. When Moses is greeted by Ramses, he's now Pharaoh, now having his child, in what Moses explains to Ramses to release the Hebrews and transforms the staff into a snake to demonstrate the power of God. Hotep and Huey somehow insultingly recreate the transformation, but their snakes have to be eaten by Moses's. But the actions caused by the wanting of what he does to the collapse feels betrayed. What the motives are what he did. However, Ramesses doubles the workload of what Ramses was going to do this. As the Hebrews, including Aaron, blame Moses for the increased workload, disheartening him all. But Miriam tells Moses to preserve the casting of the first of the 10 plagues of Egypt. But Ramesses Ramses becomes unmovable of inflicting 8 more plagues on Egypt but Ramses refuses to relent it, vowing not to release the Hebrews. Disheartened, Moses unleashes the Hebrews for the 10th and final plague, and that instructs him to sacrifice the lamb to mark the doorpost with its blood, as the last plague kills all the babies of Egypt, including his son. They spared those of the Hebrews as he was grief-stricken, as he gave the Hebrews permission to leave, realizing he collapsed in despairingly grief. But within the Red Sea, a vengeful Ramses pursues them. He was army intended to kill them. However, a pillar of fire blocks everything away in what Moses uses the staff to part the sea to heal the fire. As the crossing of the open sea bottom was caused by the Hebrews, the army is chased away. The sea closes over the soldiers, sparing him alone. But he sadly bids Ramses his farewell of saying goodbye to him, telling the Hebrews to go to Mount Sinai, where he receives the 10 Commandments. All I can say is, this is by far, this alongside Shrek, were the best animated movies to the bunch. As I noticed, despite the bad qualities of how I learned in Ants about why would you commit a genocide on innocent people to prove that causing a natural disaster is not what you expected. Although it is quite divisive, but the music and the soundtrack played by Stephen Schwartz, including the Country Feed Nashville soundtrack and Gospel's inspirational soundtrack, and also they also hired Mariah Carey and Whitney Houston to perform When You Believe. And so, at the Salisbury Cathedral Choir, they've done a really good job hiring Boyz II Men, Casey and JoJo, and Sally Dworsky to be involved in it. But although it is quite an awesome movie, it received critical acclaim of what they finally got this from. When it reached the 1999 Oscars, in a bet to beat Ants, it went on to win the Best Original Song at the 71st Academy Awards. Thus, it also managed to beat Mulan by a landslide. So, despite the awesome animation that would inspire Spider-Verse, I'm going to give this one a 10 out of 10. Because this movie is really good. I know I would like to enjoy watching this movie sometime around, Christmas. As I noticed, I'm excited to revisit this movie for next year in January. Maybe that'll be a good idea for me to watch it. But without out of the way, I noticed I love to know that characters are diverse, and that's all what I learned from. The lesson of this movie is, it's quite awesome to learn. It is tough to be like King, or what I saw in Lion King, the one where it's tough to learn how to be a king, is you have to respect your elders and your friends, and that's alright. But from this moment on, as I learned my lesson from the movie, it's what I saw something of what I believed. I know I believed that after Michael Eisner refused it, Steven Spielberg would join forces with Katzenberg to prove that they could understand what most people would have a dream. It's okay, but that's alright. But after I learned this lesson, I just learned something very important. I've learned my lesson about seeing this movie. I actually enjoyed it, and I kind of admired this whole movie being so entertaining, and I noticed that it's quite awesome. And as I know, tomorrow Halloween's going to be over, and yeah, so as I noticed, that is all I can say about this one. So, bye-bye.